Alright everyone, it is Finn here and welcome to my African World Cup qualifiers for Matchweek 5. Now of course international football is finally back and more importantly African football is finally back. Now a tiny bit of a warning, we do have over 20 games to talk about in today's video, so much like Salah's chances of winning the Ballon d'Or after this previous week, let's just get this over with.
I prefer really not to speak.
So let's start off with our first game, Liberia versus Tunisia. Now I will admit that Tunisia aren't quite the footballing powerhouse that they used to be in Africa in my opinion, but between these two teams they should still be the obvious favourites. Tunisia have only lost 3 in their last 15 games, which is quite impressive, especially compared to Liberia where they've lost 4 in their last 5. In terms of overall form and in terms of individuals in the squad, Tunisia is definitely a more promising team, and if I had to pick a winner here, I would go for Tunisia with the let's go with a cheeky 1-0 win. Next up we've got Eswatini versus Cameroon. Now if the other game had a clear favourite, this one is absolutely blown out of the water. Eswatini I believe have only won 1 game out of their last 16 and it was versus Somalia, so you know what, I don't even know if we count that one. We're looking at Cameroon, no they haven't quite been the poster boys for consistency over the last few years. They are that team that can lose weird points here and there, very much like the Manchester United of African football, which I don't know what that says about Andre Onana, but at the end of the day you would be foolish not to go for Cameroon here still. The amount of talent that they do have in their team, I mean this should be an absolute walk in the park for them. I mean it's going to be like that Ronaldo Nike ad when he played with the kids. Hold on, not like that.
Ah, cheeky boy.
At the end of the day, I have to give this one to Cameroon 2-0. Now next up we've got the Central African Republic versus Madagascar, an absolute battle of the stinkers, because looking at Madagascar, I think they're now 6 games without a win, but at least they do get draws here and there, showing that they've got a little element of resilience there, where the Central African Republic, despite some of the players they've had over the last few years, they have not been in good shape. In their last 5 games alone, they've scored 0 goals, and saying that at the same time they have conceded 13, so this could very much be a 0-0 draw in my opinion, and I think that's what I'm going to go with. Now Mozambique versus Uganda is next, and this could be a really underrated fixture to watch. Looking at both teams, both only lost 1 game in the upcoming AFCON qualifiers. I do think that this game could go absolutely either way. If I had to put money on it, I would put it as a 1-1. If you guys are looking to bet on any upcoming football matches, make sure to use my Mega Parry link down below with code FIN if you're looking to receive a 200% welcome registration bonus. Ultimately it does help my channel out massively, and of course I want to see you guys win big too. But talking about winning big, I'm not sure anyone's going to do that in this next fixture. We've got Malawi versus Namibia. Now I don't think either team is necessarily strong favourites in this fixture, although if I did have to edge for one I would go for Namibia.
To know, I think that's a bit dodgy, mate.
Obviously they drew versus Cameroon last year. They've got that little element of resilience. Obviously they've got Shalulila as their striker, one of the top goal scorers of all time in the South African Premier League, and although maybe his goals at national level have dried up a tiny bit, you still do have that experience in the team, and versus Malawi I do think that they would be able to kind of at least scrape a 1-0 win. And that takes us to Zimbabwe versus Benin. Now looking at Zimbabwe, I do think that they are the favourites in my book, at least in this game. They've only lost 1 out of their last 6 games. They can be incredibly tricky to break down. They still have tricky talents here and there throughout their team, some real true hidden gems in their team, and they should take this one 1-0 in my opinion. And in terms of Cape Verde versus Mauritius, this game also has a clear favourite here. I would be shocked if Cape Verde didn't win this. I'm going to go for a 2-0 victory here. Yes, I know they obviously haven't qualified for the upcoming African Cup of Nations, but in my opinion, even over Ghana, they are maybe the biggest shock not to be going to this tournament. Obviously, they've proven in the current World Cup qualifiers, being 3rd in the group, that they are a nation with a lot of talent, with a lot of ability. I honestly think in the AFCON qualifiers, they almost just got unlucky. It was just a bad patch of form, and I really hope that people don't label that as the team in terms of their overall ability. For Sierra Leone versus Guinea-Bissau, if you asked me a year or 2 ago, I would have definitely put Sierra Leone as the strong favourites, as they were really impressive here and there in African football. But at the current moment, I don't think either team is doing particularly well. I do think that this could go in either direction, and I know he hasn't necessarily started off to a majorly strong start, but I'm a huge fan of Beto kind of changing his international allegiances for Guinea-Bissau. I think he's a top striker on his day. No, maybe he's not Premier League level, and maybe he shouldn't still be at Everton, but I definitely do think he's a striker with the place, and I think once he starts kicking in the goals, I just don't think he'll stop, and I do think Guinea-Bissau will win this 1-0. Next up it's Libya versus Angola, and I'm going to say this, Angola are without a doubt the biggest biggest sleeping giants in African football at the moment, as they are 11 games unbeaten.
That is bloody lovely.
I'm surprised nobody is talking about this nation. They definitely have proved a major point over the last few years, and versus Libya, I'm going to go for a 3-1 win here, our biggest scoreline so far. I also think our next game's a pretty easy one. I have to go for Gabon here with a 2-0 win, especially with Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang rejoining the national team, as we know he is still a top underrated striker, but even without him, they were performing relatively well. We also have Gambia versus Kenya, and this is a gigantic game as Kenya have a brand new coach with Benny McCarthy, the only ever South African to win the Champions League. He did so with Porto in 2004 with that Jose Mourinho team. But obviously, as we know, your playing ability, those accolades don't always just translate to coaching.
I've called this press conference to announce that we want you, the fans at home and abroad, to support someone else.
And you know what, just out of belief and just because it would excite me, I have to go for Kenya here with a 1-0 win. For Comoros Mali, both teams are 7 games unbeaten at the moment and very similar records, although I will admit maybe Mali had slightly weaker opponents, but you know what, at the end of the day, you can literally only play what's in front of you, and both teams have been doing relatively well at the moment. Obviously, if you had to look at the individuals, Mali would be the stronger team on paper here, but as we know, you don't always play on paper, you play on the field.
God damn it, Gump! You're a goddamn genius!
But I do remember Mali in the last AFCON versus South Africa, how physical they tended to be, and I think they're going to scrape a 1-0 win here. For Equatorial Guinea versus Sao Tome and Principe, I'm not even going to entertain this game. Sao Tome and Principe are 20 games without a win at the moment, whereas we know Equatorial Guinea is a team that can be very difficult to take down, and they can be very resilient. They are a top African team that don't get enough credit. This one could get very ugly. I'm going to go for Equatorial Guinea with a 3-0 win here. For Botswana versus Algeria, now Botswana could be a very tricky cookie here, and it could very much be a 0-0 draw. But even though Algeria aren't the team that they used to be about half a decade ago when they won the African Cup of Nations, still very much a top team, still so much top talent, I have to go for Algeria here with a 2-0 win.
It's part of the game, innit?
For Rwanda versus Nigeria, this game won't be as easy as many people do think. Obviously, the last time they played against each other, Rwanda did win this one 2-1. Nigeria are currently second last in their group, but to be honest, I think it's going to be a ticking time bomb. There's only so much time until Nigeria finally kicks off with the amount of talent in their team. Obviously, they are the current runners-up of the African Cup of Nations. So in the qualifiers, I do think Nigeria will eventually pick it up. And I do think it will happen here with a 3-0 win. For Burkina Faso versus Djibouti, I do think Djibouti will get spanked here.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
And I do think it will be a 2-0 win. I've said this for many years now, much like Angola are at the moment, but Burkina Faso are sleeping giants in African football. In terms of quality throughout the entire spine of their team, they've got some exciting young players coming through their system and some really top quality class. I do think without a doubt Burkina Faso should take this one 2-0. Now for the DRC versus the South Sudan, obviously looking at the DRC coming fourth in the most recent African Cup of Nations, and I actually went to go see South Sudan play against South Africa here in Cape Town, where once again I was very much unimpressed. I think defensively they were really worrying, and on the attacking front I can't say that they are much of a threat at the moment. Where the DRC, I would put them up there with, as I said, the likes of Angola, maybe the likes of Burkina Faso as sleeping giants, and in fact maybe just a level ahead that. There is a lot of talent in this team, especially with Bakambu, obviously back in that striker position, now that he's reintroduced to the national team after over a year. Also with the likes of Axel Tuanzebe introduced to the defense, I would be surprised if the DRC did not take this one 3-0 at least. For South Africa versus Lesotho, once again South Africa really good over the last few years, obviously third place in the most recent AFCON.
It's been 84 years.
And I know you can't always just look at previous performances, but the reality is there is a lot more promising talent in South Africa at the moment compared to Lesotho, and you know what, I back my boys. This should be a very good 3-0 win as well. Next up, we've got Ghana versus Chad. Now, of course, Ghana need to pick up their socks, not going to the next AFCON over not qualifying, and this could be a really tricky game for them because Ghana are unpredictable at the moment. I mean, if I could be a fly on the wall for this match, I mean, Ghana might lose to the fly. That is how unpredictable they are. Look at Chad though, once again, I would also be shocked if they got a result here. At the end of the day, I have to still go for Ghana here despite the form. I'm going to give them a 1-0. For Burundi Ivory Coast, of course I'm going to go for Ivory Coast, the current AFCON champions when it comes to goals. They've scored 13 goals in qualifiers so far. Defensively, they're really solid with a really solid midfield. I'd be shocked if they did not take this one. Maybe a big 4-0 win.
Well, this is going to hurt like a mother.
And for Guinea versus Somalia, once again, Guinea not going to the next AFCON. As you know, Garassi, really top striker at the moment, been fantastic in the Champions League. He should get almost a hat-trick versus Somalia. I'm going to go for 3-0. For Ethiopia versus Egypt, it is really hard to ignore that attacking partnership of Omar Mamouche and Mo Salah. I do think that now that both teams or both players are currently in form, I do think they could run an absolute rampage. And versus Ethiopia, you know what, I expect nothing less than a 3-0 win. And the same can be said about Niger versus Morocco. Morocco, even though it's 3 years on now from the last World Cup where they reached the semi-final, they still have so much talent, and they are definitely not even a weaker team since then. They keep on adding to their strength, they keep on adding exciting youngsters, and versus the likes of Niger, I mean, come on, let's be honest, a 4-0 win here. Brahim Diaz could be absolutely immaculate here. For Togo versus Mauritania, I don't think neither team is fantastic at the moment, and neither have they been over the last year. I'm going for a 1-1 draw. And finally, Senegal versus Sudan. Let's be honest, this is still a Senegal team with a lot of talent, even though they are really an aged squad in terms of their key players. Those key players are still delivering on quite a consistent basis for the national team. I'm going to go for 2-0, although yes, they can slip up here and there. But of course, ladies and gentlemen, that is it for my African World Cup qualifier predictions for Matchweek 5. Don't forget to let me know what your predictions are down below. I'm so excited that African football is back. But you know what? Let's see what happens. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.